The right is leading the world to success or to chaos. In recent years, we have seen an impressive rise of right-wing leaders in various parts of the world. Donald Trump in the US, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, Giorgia Meloni in Italy, Viktor Orban in Hungary, and more recently, Javier Milei in Argentina. But what does this mean to the future of the planet? For some, this represents a return to economic growth, the strengthening of national sovereignty, and the protection of traditional values. For others, it is a sign of authoritarianism, increased inequality and social setback. But after all, is the right saving or destroying the world? Today, we will analyze both sides of this debate, bringing facts, examples, and arguments for you to draw your own conclusions. So, are you prepared to face this controversy? The rise of the right around the world did not happen by chance. From the 2008 financial crisis, through the collapse of trust in institutions, to the intensified polarization by social networks, there are a number of factors that help drive right movements in various nations. But what really motivated this conservative and populist wave? If we look at the last 20 years, we will notice an interesting pattern. Whenever the left spends a significant period in power, there is a reaction movement that favors the right. It was like this in the United States, where the Obama era was followed by the Trump phenomenon. In Brazil, where PT's government years paved the way for Bolsonaro, and in Europe, where right-wing parties have grown in response to progressive policies in the European Union. The great trigger of this phenomenon can be attributed to growing dissatisfaction with globalist policies, uncontrolled immigration, increased crime, and a feeling that left governments have become hostage to identity ideologies. The right then began to position itself as the answer to those who felt left behind by the system. Another crucial point was the impact of social networks. In the past, the great media were the main opinion makers, often aligned with progressive ideals. But with the advance of YouTube, Twitter, and other platforms, right-wing speeches gained space and voice. Names like Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, Jordan Peterson, and other influencers helped shape a new narrative, attracting millions of followers and influencing elections around the world. But the rise on the right was not uniform. In the US, Trump represented a nationalist and populist right. In Brazil, Bolsonaro mixed conservatism with an anti-corruption and anti-establishment speech. In Europe, leaders such as Viktor Orban and Giorgia Meloni adopted a hard line against immigration and European Union policies. Each country had its own version of this phenomenon, adapted to its political and social reality. The big question is this rise on the right a sustainable movement or just a temporary response to global discontent? What's more, the right really brought solutions to the problems you promised to solve or just created new challenges. Now that we understand the context, let's go to the arguments in favor of the right. After all, what really worked? Arguments in favor. Is the right leading the world to success? Right defenders claim that this movement has been essential for economic growth, public safety, and the preservation of traditional values. Let's go to the main points. Right-wing governments often adopt free market policies, tax reduction, and privatization, creating a favorable environment for investments and job creation. In the US, Trump reduced taxes and boosted economic growth before pandemic. In Brazil, Bolsonaro bet on bureaucracy and attracted investments. In Europe, countries such as Poland and Hungary have grown above the EU average under conservative governments. The right defends more rigid laws and greater police presence to reduce crime. In the US, Republican states such as Texas and Florida adopted zero-tolerance policies. In Brazil, Bolsonaro flexed access to arms and strengthened security forces. In Europe, conservative governments hardened laws against illegal immigration and terrorism. The right is positioned against progressive agendas that considers a threat to family and national identity. Leaders like Orbán and Bolsonaro criticized gender ideology and promoted conservative policies. In the US, Republicans have restricted the teaching of progressive themes in schools. Right governments question the role of global institutions, prioritizing national interests. Brexit was an example of this stance, as was Trump and Bolsonaro's criticism of the UN and the World Economic Forum. Right advocates argue that these policies have brought more growth, safety, and stability. But do these advances overcome criticism? Now let's look at the opposite arguments. Arguments against the right is leading the world to chaos. Critics on the right say that their policies increase inequality, threaten democracy, and deepen social polarization. Let's go to the main points. Right leaders are often accused of weakening democratic institutions and spreading misinformation. Trump and Bolsonaro questioned the elections and encouraged distrust in the system. In Hungary, Orbán has been criticized for censoring the press and changing laws to stay in power. Free market policies on the right, although they favor growth, tend to benefit the richest. In the US, Trump's tax cuts increased the deficit and concentrated wealth at the top. In Brazil, hunger and poverty have continued to be a problem, and in Europe, conservative countries face difficulties post-Brexit. Right governments often adopt strict postures against minority rights and environmental issues. Bolsonaro flexed environmental rules, resulting in records of deforestation. In the US and Europe, conservative laws restricted LGBTQA+ agendas and the right to abortion. The right defends greater border control, but critics claim that this leads to xenophobia and the dehumanization of immigrants. Trump hardened policies against illegal immigrants, while European leaders imposed strict refugee measures. Right opponents argue that these policies can generate long-term instability. But is the responsibility for these problems exclusive to the right? Now we go to the conclusion. Given everything we analyze, it is clear that the rise of the right in the world is not an isolated phenomenon, but a direct response to economic crises, dissatisfaction with traditional politics, and the advancement of progressive ideologies. For many, the right represents the return to order, safety, and economic growth. For others, it is a movement that threatens democracy, increases inequality, and promotes hate speeches. But is there a definitive answer? The truth is that no government, whether right or left, is perfect. While the right hits a less swollen state and more rigid security policies, it also makes mistakes by adopting authoritarian postures and minimizing social guidelines. Likewise, the left can get it right by prioritizing policies of inclusion and fighting inequality, but often sins by exaggerating economic interventionism and the imposition of identity guidelines. The greatest danger may not be on the right or left, but in extreme polarization. When people stop analyzing facts and blindly defend one side, we lose the ability to discuss, correct mistakes, and build better solutions for all. In the end, the question is the right really saving the world or just reacting to a system crisis? What's more, what will happen when this conservative wave loses strength? Will the left resume control, or will we see the emergence of something totally new? Now I want to know your opinion. Is the right leading the world to success or chaos? Leave your comment and let's continue this debate.